19th Amendment patches for your vest. Lillian's right to vote. Oh, I love this book. I read it to my kids the other day. I found it at a wonderful Black bookstore in South Dallas called the Pan-African Bookstore. They have so many good books. I really recommend it. A very old woman stands at the bottom of a very steep hill. It is voting day. She's an American, and by God, she is going to vote. Lillian is her name. Well, pay attention to the hill. There's something about the hill in every page. It's a long haul up that steep hill. It's a long haul when you've been alive for 100 years. It's a long haul when you've lived the life that Lillian has and walked so far in her shoes. When Lillian looks up, it's more than blue sky she sees. She sees history. Lillian sees her great-grandparents, Elijah and Sarah. They are standing side by side on an auction block. Sarah is holding their baby, Edmund. They are being sold as slaves in front of the very same Alabama courthouse where rich white men and no one else are allowed to vote. So we know that a long time ago, not too long ago, only white men were allowed to vote. And our country had slaves. Lillian starts her slow climb. Through the sun, although the sun shines brightly, Lillian sees a dark time from years long past. She sees her great-grandpa Edmund, now grown. Oh, he was the baby and now he's grown. He is owned by another man and forced to pick cotton from daybreak to nightfall, right here in this country where it is written that all men are created equal. Well, he's not being treated equally. He's being forced to pick cotton. He sure doesn't have the right to vote. In fact, he doesn't have the right to do much at all until after the Civil War, which ended slavery. As Lillian inches up the hill, past one neighbor's house and then the next, she sees her great-grandpa Edmund on his way to vote for the first time, thanks to a law that was passed in 1870. This law is the 15th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, which says American citizens' right to vote shall not be denied or abridged on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. So that means that black men got the right to vote with the 15th Amendment. Even if they had been slaves, that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what color you are. Still, women don't have it. And you'll see, Edmund now, he used to be a slave, but now that the Civil War is over and after the Emancipation Proclamation, he gets the right to vote. Let's see what happens. Even though the law doesn't allow women to vote, Great-Grandma Ida is with her husband. Lillian feels their dignity and their pride as they enter that courthouse for the first time. So still, her great-grandma did not have the right to vote. But as Lillian continues and the hill gets steeper, but that hill is steep. She sees what happens just 20 years later, right here in Alabama. There's her grandpa Isaac at the courthouse being charged a poll tax to vote. They were trying to make him pay to vote. That is not fair. It's a tax he doesn't have the money to pay. So much for that 15th Amendment, so much for Grandpa Isaac's right to vote. The white men, some of them, did not want the black Americans to get to vote. And they made up laws. They made them pay. That was called a poll tax. Lillian pauses to catch her breath, hearing now the voice of her Uncle Levi. He is telling about the tests that he was forced to take when he tried to vote. and about the sneer on the register's face when he asked, "How many bubbles are in a bar of soap?" Her uncle's lips go tight as he recalls being asked to name all 67 judges in the state of Alabama and being turned away when he failed to answer such questions. Those were made-up laws that kept Black Americans from getting to vote when they knew they had the right to vote from the 15th Amendment, but people turned them away. As Lillian pushes on, struggling to keep her balance, she sees a brave girl standing next to her mother and father as they try to register to vote. The year is 1920. Oh, that's the year we know about. And the 19th Amendment has just passed, a law allowing women to vote. The girl is Lillian herself with her mama and papa. They are being chased away by an angry mob. There's Mr. Bentley, the barber, and Mr. McCrory, who owns the ice cream shop. She feels the firm grip of her mother's hand as they run through the streets back home. So finally, her mom had the right to vote. But look, these people are chasing them away. They still didn't get to use their right to vote. And though today the birds are singing and people are smiling, Lillian remembers in vivid orange and brilliant red the cross burning on the lawn of her girlhood home, set aflame by the same angry mob, just because her parents wanted to vote. This is something she will always see. She will always remember that. That would be really scary. Lillian stops in her tracks, unable to keep going. As she stands there, she remembers herself trying to register to vote for the very first time. She sees a blank piece of paper on which she must write down a section of the U.S. Constitution, word for word, as it is being mumbled by the registrar. A test no one could pass. No one could. That's not fair. "Are you going to vote?" she asks a young man who passes her on her route. "Yes, ma'am," he answers. "You better," she says, and she means it. For Lillian sees the funeral procession for a man named Jimmy Lee Jackson, a 26-year-old shot by a policeman over nothing more than taking part in a peaceful protest. It is March 1965. All he'd wanted was justice and the right to vote. So there are people that lived before us and people that are still living that fight for people's right to vote. And they know all men are created equal, and women. So it's very important to her, to Lillian, that everyone votes. Looking up to the top of the hill, Lillian wonders how she'll ever make it. It looks so far, and she's so tired. Though her feet and legs ache with 100 years of walking, what fuels her ancient body is seeing those 600 people beginning a peaceful protest march from Selma to Montgomery. People who, though they don't know it yet, will be stopped on a bridge in Selma by policemen with clubs. All they want is justice and the right to vote. At the front is future Congressman John Lewis, whose forehead will always bear the scar from where he was beaten. If you watch the news today, you'll hear and see that one of our American heroes, civil rights leader John Lewis, just died last week. And lots of us are very sad about that. But the whole nation's capital is honoring him. As long as Lillian still has a pulse, she is going to vote. And so she keeps on climbing, keeps on seeing This time, the second march from Selma. This march also ends on the bridge in a prayer led by, do you guys know who this is? The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., whose dreams of justice for African Americans are already famous. Wherever he went, he lifted people up with his words, and his words still lift up Lillian, who, seeing the top of the hill, is not about to stop. Footstep by footstep, she keeps going. Oh, you can see all the footsteps. Just as the marchers from Selma to Montgomery keep on going through the cold and rain, finally making it all the way to Montgomery, Alabama on their third march, she sees them all, Martin Luther King, John Lewis, rabbis, priests, and 25,000 others. Lillian is there. She can still hear Reverend King asking how long would they have to wait for justice. She can still feel the power of his voice when he says, "Not long." And as she takes the final steps to the top of the hill, Lillian can see how Reverend King was right, for she can hear the voice of President Lyndon Johnson on her TV saying to America, "Every American citizen must have an equal right to vote. There is no duty which weighs more heavily on us than the duty we have to ensure that right. All of us must overcome the crippling legacy of bigotry and injustice, and we shall overcome." Before Lillian walks through the doors of the building, where you better believe she will vote, she looks up and sees the same blue sky, brighter than any sky she's ever seen, that she saw on August 6, 1965. That was the day President Johnson signed the Voting Rights Act, the one law protecting all Americans' right to vote in every state and every town, the one law protecting Lillian as a full-fledged citizen of the United States. So what year was it? The Voting Rights Act? 1965. So that was a long time, from 1920 to 1965, for Black women and men to get the actual protection of the right to vote, that said no more poll taxes, no more special tests to get to vote. Anyone who's over 18 in our country can vote. She enters the building, and as Lillian steps into the voting booth, once again she sees herself stepping into the voting booth in 1965 for the very first time, and she knows full well she would not be standing here today were it not for the people who marched and the people who died for her right to vote. Lillian touches her finger to the lever, and because she is a citizen of the United States of America, protected by the Voting Rights Act of 1965, Lillian pushes that lever. Lillian votes. That is really exciting, to vote anytime, especially the first time. And I want you to know that Lillian was inspired by a real person named Lillian. And she was a resident of Pittsburgh Hill District, born in Alabama in 1908, the granddaughter of a slave. And when she was 100 years old in 2008, she got to vote for the first Black president. Do you remember who that was? President Obama. And she even campaigned door to door on the hills in her neighborhood, encouraging other people to vote. That is amazing. Now, the sad coda to this story, that means an extra ending. The sad coda to this story is that in 2013, so 7 years ago, the Supreme Court struck down a key provision of the Voting Rights Act of 1965, eliminating oversight of states' election processes. So since that decision, this is kind of tricky, But some states, even Texas, have created voter ID laws which require all citizens to present a state-issued photo ID when voting. And that is really difficult for the poor and elderly like Lillian to get. So some of these new laws have kept people like her from voting again, a basic American right for which so many people fought and died. The right to vote still needs protection. And this question says, will a new generation rise and continue this fight? I will. I think it's so important that everybody gets to vote. So I will do that. Maybe you will too. Maybe you care about it too. I love that book. It helps me remember how long it has taken for all Americans to get the right to vote. So we know it didn't just happen for everybody in 1920, but we are celebrating the 19th Amendment. After the Voting Rights Act of 1965, when Black women could safely go to the polls and vote, some of them started to run for office, which means they started to run for positions of leadership in government like congresswoman or state representatives. And I want to read you about one of those women today. Maybe one of you someday will run for office too. What do you do with a voice like that? This is the story of the extraordinary Congresswoman Barbara Jordan. She was a famous Texan. Growing up in the 5th Ward of Houston, Texas, Barbara Jordan stood out. She may have looked like other kids, she may have acted like other kids, but she sure didn't sound like other kids. Not with that voice of hers. She looks like she has courage, confidence, and character, just like a Girl Scout. That voice, that big, bold, booming, crisp, clear, confident voice, it caused folks to sit right up, stand up straight, and take notice. What do you do with a voice like that? Well, first you give that voice something to say. Barbara recited poetry at church. She memorized speeches for school. She entered contests, and in 1952, she won a trip to Chicago. The first time she'd ever left Texas. Barbara was proud of herself and proud of her voice. It was laying a path for her. Looks like she traveled by train. What an adventure. But where would that path lead? On Sunday evenings, Barbara would talk things over with Grandpa Patton. Would she become a preacher like her father and like her mother could have been? Or a teacher like those who encouraged her? Or perhaps she'd become a lawyer. Not many Black women had achieved that, but one who had done so visited her school and gave a speech. Barbara was inspired. Being a lawyer would be a marvelous use of her voice. But before that can happen, what's the next thing you do with a voice like that? I wonder if any of you might be a lawyer someday. Lawyers help people protect their rights. You give it more knowledge to work with. College opened Barbara's eyes to how the country was changing and how it wasn't. She learned how to find facts for herself, debate important issues, defend good ideas, and dismantle bad ones. Her law classes challenged her more than anything she'd known. She hid her struggles from her classmates, studying long and hard and out of sight. She is very persistent. She really wants to do well. And when she graduated, yes, Barbara became a lawyer. But being a lawyer bored her. She used a typewriter and a pen a lot more than she did her voice, and there was not enough work to occupy her time or her mind. Sometimes you do some job for a while and you learn from it and you decide, yep, I might try another job. Lots of people try lots of jobs. There was, however, lots of political work that needed doing. In 1960, oh, that's before the Voting Rights Act. In 1960, America was not as free or as fair a place as it could be. Barbara believed that politics could change that, so she got involved. One night, a scheduled speaker was absent, and Barbara was asked if she would fill in. She said yes. Wow, she does have courage and confidence. The audience loved her. They trusted her. Most important, they were inspired to do something, to get out and vote, and to help round up others and get them to vote. Her voice had made a difference. Barbara, bitten by the political bug, as she later put it, knew just what to do with a voice like that. She put it to public use. Oh, I think she's going to run for office. Barbara wanted more justice and more equality. She knew that these things began with more citizens sharing their own voices with their representatives in government. To make sure they got heard, Barbara decided to run for political office herself. So she ran, and she lost. And she ran, and she lost. I have no intention of being a 3-time loser, she said. She ran a 3rd time. What I love about stories about strong women like this is we discover their path is not easy. They don't ever succeed the first time. They have to try and try again. That's called persistence. There are things all of us have to try and try again before we get it right, before it works out for us. That takes a lot of courage and hard work. This sticker says, Barbara Jordan is my shero. Oh, good. This time she won. As a Texas state senator, Barbara represented the people she'd grown up among. Before, she'd merely trusted in the political system, and now she was a part of it. When it works right, the system makes laws that improve our lives, and it makes sure